Alright, this is my long-awaited Surface Pro versus iPad Pro video. Yeah, I know most people published these types of reviews months ago when the products came out, but I wanted to wait a little bit. I wanted to let it sink in and I wanted to see how I actually use them in my workflow. And that just takes time. Here's how I break it down. Now the Surface Pro 3 I have had for about 2 years now since it came out. The iPad Pro I have now had for like 5 or 6 months. I did use the Surface Pro 4 for about a month and I used that for my review, so I have a pretty good feel for it. So I'm ready for this. I've been using these devices for my everyday illustration workflow for a while now, and I feel like I know them extremely well and I can make a better judgment now. So let's just jump into the comparisons. First, I want to start off by talking about software or apps. Now this is almost a tie at this point. Early on my iPad review, I said that this was definitely a weakness for the iPad. But as I've gotten to know a lot of the software that's out there, there's some really good stuff. I'm gonna have to give the edge to the Surface. But even though both have great software, the software for both of these devices is very different. Now the Surface Pro is a full-blown laptop replacement, so you can run everything, Photoshop, Illustrator, Manga Studio, Clip Studio, all that powerful illustration software that's been out there forever. The software for the iPad Pro, on the other hand, is more streamlined and slimmed down. And when you're dealing with an illustration tablet, both have their pros and cons. On one hand, having all those power features on the Surface with the keyboard shortcuts and all that crazy stuff you can already do is fantastic. And I often miss a lot of that stuff on the iPad Pro. For example, I draw a lot of comics, so when I'm using an app like Procreate, I can draw a straight line, but I can't make it snap to a 90-degree angle. That's really easy to do in pretty much any desktop program. Of course, you need a keyboard to pull it off. I can say the same exact thing about selecting a color. I could do that easily in most iPad programs, but it slows you down just a little bit. Changing tools, adjusting brush sizes, all of these little details just happen slightly faster on a Surface Pro. But at the same time, there are some trade-offs to having all these powerful tools. You have to have a keyboard, which means your keyboard has to be available and open to you on your Surface. And there's something kind of elegant about the iPad programs where you don't have to have a keyboard to do anything. It lets you set it at a more comfortable drawing position, it lets you take it anywhere, you don't have to flip open the keyboard to do stuff periodically. Also, I love vector drawing apps. Actually, I just love Adobe Illustrator. There are a dozen vector apps available for the iPad, but they all fall short. Like really short. The one bright, shiny light for the iPad in this category is an app called Astropad. I've talked about it a dozen times, and what it does is turn your iPad into like a Cintiq type drawing tablet. So if you're used to drawing on a Mac, this could be the one app that makes you an iPad Pro fan over a Surface Pro fan. Next up, I want to talk about the tech, the hardware. I'm just talking about what it's like to draw on these things, not necessarily like RAM and specs and USB ports and all that goofy stuff. And I have to say, the Apple Pencil soundly beats the Surface Pro pen. Now when I'm using the Surface Pro, usually I don't see any lag when I'm drawing, but oftentimes as the file sizes get bigger, or if I'm using a bigger, bulkier program like Photoshop, I will see some lag. Quite a bit of lag sometimes. But on the iPad Pro, I never see any. Now of course some of this is probably due to the fact that the programs are lighter weight. There's also less displacement to the pen tip when you're drawing. So when I'm drawing on the Surface Pro, there's a little bit of difference between where the pen tip is and where you actually see your line appear. And there's less on the iPad Pro. This just gives it a more accurate and natural feel. The Apple Pencil, it brags about its tilt recognition, whereas the Surface Pen doesn't have any. And drawing on the Surface just kinda has a few quirks. The problem with the Surface Pro 3 was that the pen had a bit of a wobble to it when you drew on an angle. And even though that was greatly improved on the Surface Pro 4, it had its own problems. Specifically the line taper problem, the shoestring that I've talked about in other videos. Microsoft still hasn't fixed it. They say they're working on it, but I don't know if they're ever actually going to get around to fixing it. Now most of these I consider minor nuisances. I still create some of my best work on the Surface Pro using these tools. But when comparing it to the Apple Pencil doesn't have any of these little minor problems. Next up, I want to talk about workflow. Now this was my one big concern when I started using the iPad Pro. I have gotten more used to the workflow on the iPad Pro over time, but it is far from perfect. For example, it can be kind of a pain in the butt to transfer files. Not only just files from your iPad back to your computer, but also just assets between programs. If I draw something in vector in one program and I paste it into Procreate, I have no idea what size that's going to be. And once you pasted it as a bitmap, you're stuck at the size you're at. It means I have to go back to the vector app, resize it way up, and then copy and paste it over. On the Surface Pro, if I'm using Illustrator and Photoshop, I could just copy the stuff from Illustrator, paste it into Photoshop, resize it to whatever size I need. That kind of workflow just works better on a desktop. And there's millions of tiny examples like this that I bump into when I'm using the iPad Pro. For example, if I'm working in an app on the iPad and I need to create a new folder, I have to open the Dropbox app, create the folder there, go back to the app, and then I can save it to that folder. If I'm lettering a comic, I have to take it out of the app I'm using and I have to go to another app. And there are millions of examples like this where you're bouncing from app to app to app to app, and it's really kind of a fractured experience. More often than not, I end up taking my iPad Pro artwork and then pushing it to the desktop, sometimes even the Surface, and finishing it there. And finally, I want to talk about convenience. The edge here goes to the iPad Pro easily. It's thinner, it's lighter, it has a longer battery life. If I'm going to take my daughter to ice skating lessons and I'm going to draw while she's doing that, I'm taking my iPad with me. Drawing on the iPad is just plain fun. Using the Surface Pro usually feels like work. Now, it's not bad that it feels like work when I'm working. But when I just want to have fun and brainstorm and sketch, I'm always going for the iPad Pro. On the iPad, there seems like there's just less between me and actually drawing. The iPad turns on instantaneously. I swipe and I'm in my drawing program. The Surface Pro takes a couple seconds to wake up, and then you have to log in your password, and then you have to boot up your program. Every little step takes a couple seconds. And with the Surface Pro, you have to deal with Windows. Some people are big fans of Windows. I came from the world of Macs. And so to be completely honest, it was kind of a huge learning curve for me to get used to Windows and all the quirks that come along with it. There are things that happen on my Surface Pro that just have never happened with any Mac I've owned. Occasionally the keyboard cover will stop working, and so I'll spend like 10 or 15 minutes trying to get it to work. If I haven't used my Surface Pro in a few days, it feels like every time I boot it up, it's installing some kind of Windows update. And it seems like I spend a lot of time just trying to get my environment feeling the way I want it to feel. For example, just the other day, I spent like a half hour trying to figure out how to turn off the handwriting keyboard to get the normal keyboard to pop up whenever I needed to enter some kind of information or value in Photoshop. It's like Windows has so many options that getting through all those options takes time and sucks you away from what you're actually trying to achieve. But on the plus side, I have all the power that comes with Windows. I have programs with hundreds and hundreds of options in them. I can use whatever font I want. I can use whatever brush I want. I can go on the internet and find even more brushes and more fonts. And now that I do have my setup working really well, I'm like super fast with it. The iPad Pro doesn't have a lot of those power user settings. On the plus side, you don't get those power user headaches. So it comes down to, do you want the simple experience with less control, or do you want a complex experience with more control? I can hear people in the comments now saying, "You're using Windows wrong, Brad." But that's why I give the edge to the iPad. There's no wrong way to use the iPad Pro. All right, so this is the big question. Which one of these devices should you get? And the answer is, I don't know, it depends. Let me start off by saying these are both amazing devices. When I want to have fun and just sketch, I always grab the iPad. When I want to do work, I grab the Surface. If you're a power user and you have a specific tool, you've been using Manga Studio for years and you love it, the Surface Pro is probably the better option for you. If you're starting from scratch and you don't have any bias towards any operating system, the iPad might be the best option for you. If you're already used to Windows and like Windows and have been drawing on Windows, the Surface Pro is a great option for you. If you're a Mac user and you want to use something like Astropad, or you just want to use the apps to draw and sketch, again, the iPad might be the best option for you. If you want to replace your laptop completely and only have one device, the Surface is really the only way to go here. With the iPad, you're probably going to be more comfortable taking your work back to the desktop to finish it. It's more of a companion device. So if I was stuck on a desert island and I could only choose one, which would I take? They'd both run out of power. It doesn't matter. I keep going back and forth on this. I'd have to go with the Surface. It is so close, but I'd have to go with the Surface. I still create my best work on the Surface. Ultimately, I want the power tools. I've enjoyed reviewing this stuff over the last couple months. There are a lot more reviews I'm going to be doing in the coming weeks, so subscribe to follow along to those. Also, in the description below are a lot of the other reviews I've done for apps for the iPad Pro and the Surface Pro, and talking about my experience, learning about these devices and becoming a better illustrator over the last few months. I'm also working on a little side project site. It's called whatdrawingtablet.com, I think. And what I plan to do is compile reviews and compile some of this information I use. So if you have a question as to, what products do I like? How do these things compare to each other and that sort of thing? I'm going to be compiling them all on a website so it's easier to find some of this information. And if I missed anything, or if there's something that's like super important to you when you're using these devices, let me know in the comments. Hit me up on Twitter. Just let me know what you think of the review. and I'll talk to you guys in a week or two.